Good morning, my name is Ann Arnold. I'm the Director of Early Learning for Highline Public Schools, and I have the privilege this morning of facilitating a conversation with Dr. Susan Enfield, Highline's Superintendent. We are really excited to talk to you today about your work around P-3 strategies and your passion and advocacy for early learning. So this Race to the Top team of early learning leads from across the 7-district region has put together a series of questions that we would like to ask you. Starting with, would you share your personal and professional pre-K-3 story? What made you believe that this approach would help improve child outcomes and close the opportunity gap, not only in Highline, but across the region?
Sure. Well, welcome everyone. Good morning. Thanks for being a part of the conversation. I'm really happy to be here. And I actually am a high school teacher by vocation. So that's where my work in education really began. Loved teaching high school. And it was really when I did my superintendent internship in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, Amish country, with Vicki Phillips, who is now at the Gates Foundation. She was the superintendent in Lancaster. I was her superintendent intern. And this was back in 2002. And Vicki had moved towards full-day kindergarten in Lancaster, which at the time was a really new concept. Not everyone was doing that. And so I got a real on-the-ground education in the importance of early learning, the importance of pushing an agenda that would make really sort of permanent gains for kids over time, which was sort of my big takeaway, right? That if our kids didn't get a really strong start, everything we did in subsequent years in our systems was going to be band-aiding, you know, and that we needed to have that strong start. So it was my work in Lancaster that really showed me the power of full-day kindergarten. And then when I worked at the state level in Pennsylvania, I really got sort of the policy perspective, not just around K-12, but around pre-K as well. There was a woman there, Harriet Dichter, who was a huge early learning advocate, and she was the one who really schooled me in the importance of that, the importance of quality rating, which of course we talk about now with early achievers in our state. I think it was Keystone Stars or something like that was the rating system we had in Pennsylvania at the time. So I was just really fortunate, not having had an early learning background in terms of my practice, but meeting these champions of early learning throughout my career. And then as I sort of continued my work in district leadership roles and read the research, it became clear to me that investing in early learning was really a sort of a duh moment. That you can have mounds of research, but at the end of the day, I think it just passes the common sense test. That if we give our kids a strong start early on, they're going to have a better chance of succeeding in our district. And so I have been passionate and vocal advocate for this work ever since.
Great, that's really helpful. Well, another question we had was, what are your next 3 steps in implementing Highline's P-3 vision and plans from the superintendent's perspective?
Sure. So I'm entering my 3rd year as superintendent here in Highline. And when I arrived, we had roughly half of our elementary schools offering full-day kindergarten. And that was a combination of tuition-free and pay-for-K. My first year, we used some of our Title I set-aside money, which we no longer have because we lost our state waiver. But we used some of that money to add 2 more schools my first year here, because I made it clear to the team when I got here, I want to see the plan for getting to full-day K as quickly as possible in the district. So we added 2 schools my first year. And then the second year, last year when we were here, we decided to go all in. And the state did increase the amount of money that we had. And so we have 3 schools that we now use our own levy general fund dollars to fund, so that every child in Highline has access to tuition-free full-day kindergarten. That could not have happened, though, without really strong leadership. Everyone thinks a superintendent can wave their magic wand and make it so. It ain't that easy, trust me. You have to have a vision, but you have to be able to communicate that vision. More importantly, you have to recruit really, really smart people to work with you in making that vision a reality. And so step 1 for me in moving towards this early learning agenda was convincing Ann Arnold to make the commute every day to come and work here in Highline as a P-3 director. And really in conversations with Jody Havig, who gave us some really early support to get this work jump-started when I first arrived, which we're really grateful for. And it was really Jody and Ann who got me thinking about this not just as a director of early learning, but a P-3 director. That signaled something very different in people's minds, because I think when we talk early learning, sometimes people think of it as birth to 3, some of them think of it pre-KK, some think of it, K1, 2, 3, and really we've got to start, creating systems. So we, at this point, have, I think, maximized what we have and can do. So every child has access to a high-quality full-day K program. Unfortunately, not all of our students have access to pre-K right now. We don't have the space in the district to provide it, nor do we have the resources. However, we're expanding opportunities, more Head Start slots, ECAP, partnering with our family, friend, neighbor, and child care providers so that our students are coming in more ready to learn, doing the pre-K play and learn. So we're being as creative as possible, absent having the ideal, which would be a really high quality environment for all of our 3 and 4-year-olds. But I also want to say that, and I'll get to the question in a second, this is all background. But I do want to say, and we just had this conversation with our principals the other day, that while I would love for our state to provide pre-K, well, full-day K and pre-K for all of our kids, we have the data to show that in spite of the fact that many of our students do not come in necessarily ready to learn in kindergarten, we can accomplish so much in that kindergarten year to get them on track by 1st grade. And so I really, really have put a lot of energy and focus on that full-day kindergarten year because that I have control over. I don't have control over what happens to them, to all of them, prior to kindergarten. I do have control over what happens to them once they're here as 5-year-olds. And so if that's my highest leverage point, that's where I'm going to put a lot of my time, energy, and resources. Not ignoring what comes before, not trying to expand what happens in those pre-K spaces, and clearly not ignoring what happens after K, because I think that's a big mistake districts make. They are going to go on to 1st grade, and we hope 2nd, 3rd, and so on and so on. So making sure that we've got that continuum. So I think our next steps are, number 1, continuing to show the data that our kids are really benefiting from this investment, and it is an investment. And there are still people who are not bought into this, shocking as it is to those of us around the table, because we are all converts and we know the power of this, but there are people who still don't believe this is where we should be putting our resources. So being able to tell our story, and telling our story not just in data numbers, but in children's experiences and families' experiences and teachers' experiences around the power of this work, I think is incredibly important. So continuing to tell that story, continuing to build that P-3 continuum, so continuing the partnerships pre-K for our 3 and 4-year-olds and families, but also then pushing our professional development up this year into 1st grade, next year into 2nd grade, 3rd grade, and then really figuring out what's that intentional bridge going to be between 3rd and 4th and so on. I think the power of the P-3 work is that it's forcing us as a system to think of a continuum of learning, right? And it doesn't stop in 3rd grade, so it's forcing us to think of it, I think, all the way up through 12 and beyond. And that's really, I think, the next step for us. How do we take what happens in 3rd grade and use that as leverage to improve what happens in 4th, 5th, middle, and high? So I think that's our next great challenge and opportunity as a system.
So you mentioned the need for funding and the priority we all have to put on funding this work. And the group around the table is all funded by a Race to the Top grant. It has given us a great jump start to the work. So some of our positions are funded that way. Our pre-K Play and Learn program in Highline is funded that way. Where do you see us going and sustaining this work once we don't have that chunk of grant funding available to us, which will be in 2 years?
So 2 things. First of all, being really clear with the system, the board, the community, with the commitment that we've made, and that doesn't go away when the Race to the Top funding goes away. So we are not going to not have Anne and Lindsay and our folks doing this work. This isn't about Race to the Top. This is about our kids and our community in Highline, and so that's an investment that remains. So nice try. You're not going anywhere. But that's going to take some really intentional conversations that we're planning. I'm not concerned about that because we know that this is something that is part of our core work. I also think that we can't rely on it for sustainability. We can look at external funds as well, so grants and philanthropic partners and other people who have helped us along the way. But increasingly, we have to put our resources where we believe we're going to get the biggest return on investment. We are living in a time where we as educators are not afforded much wiggle room in terms of the time for getting results. And so we really, really do have to say, if this is a core strategy, then we are going to make sure that we are allocating our own general fund and categorical dollars appropriately while still seeking external funding as well. But the external funding can never be what we're counting on for sustaining the work, because it's just not sustainable. And so I am actually not worried at all about sustaining the work, because it has become so much of what we do, and quite frankly, we've codified it in our strategic plan. So, we've actually made a very public commitment that this is our core work. So we're planning already for making sure that it sustains regardless of the race to the top funding.
Great, thank you. There were questions that came from the group and that were submitted to all of us, and we wanted to share a couple of those now. And you've touched on some of them, but can you describe for us what the starting point was in Highline? You talked about hiring a P-3 director and getting certain people in place and moving into full day K. But when you began thinking about that work, how did you pull together what your vision was going to look like, and then communicate it to the district and to the community at large?
Mm-hmm. So I think, as I alluded to, increasing our full day K access was first and foremost when I got here, and immediately tasked staff with coming up with a plan for how we were going to do that. And then, of course, we the plan out the window and just did it whole hog at the end of the year anyway. There were a couple of challenges coming in that didn't deter me in moving forward, or us. But number one was, we actually had full day K in the district for several years, but had not been getting great results, because while we had some full day K, we had not invested in the support and resources for our kindergarten teachers. So students weren't having access to science and writing and art. Maybe they'd get some math and reading, but it just wasn't an intentionally planned, really joyful day of learning, which is what we wanted. That's perfect. That's perfect. Come on in. So Wanda and Sukugan from Tukwila, welcome.
Welcome.
So we, so that was a big part. So I had board members and others who I think very justifiably questioned this push, because they hadn't seen results from it. And I think that's a really fair question. So what I had to first do was help people understand that a move to full day K wasn't simply adding hours onto the day, that it was going to transform how we interacted with children in the space of that day, and that we were going to make a serious investment in enhancing the skills, the capacity, the resources, and materials that our teachers needed to do that job. So that was one thing that we really had to tackle coming in. The next thing was helping people understand the importance of this part of the work. And I think I shared this at our meeting the other day. I had a principal say to me early last year, in Highline, we didn't focus on anything before 3rd grade, because that's when the testing started. Now, I share that not to indict Highline or any of the teachers or leaders who are here. I think that was pretty common across the country under NCLB. People have felt really under fire to get results, to perform on those tests. Unfortunately, in public education, we are simply masterful at completely avoiding the shades of gray where we should be swimming and being comfortable, and going to one end or the other. So when you think about it, if the first proficiency test kids have to take is in 3rd grade, wouldn't you start to prepare them for that prior to the start of 3rd grade? So, we look back on it now, and it's like, I'm sorry, someone missed a memo. But I share this because our principals and teachers in kindergarten, 1st and 2nd grade had not been engaged in a conversation around the importance of their work, nor had they been invested in the way that they needed to be and deserved to be. So that was a huge part of the conversation too, getting the system to understand the importance of what happens pre-K, K1, 2, prior to 3. Helping people understand that full day K wasn't just more hours in the day, it's the quality of what happens between kids, teachers, staff, families within that day. And so that was really our entry point. And then I will also tell you, it takes sometimes a real leap of faith too. When we decided to go all in on full day K, we did not have every condition in place, and it maxed us out for space. And we were not entirely ready to make that shift. But if we wait until we're ready and all the conditions are in place, we wait and we wait and we wait. And again, we're masterful at that in education as well. We wait, and our kids suffer. And I wasn't willing to wait. So I took some hits, rightfully so in some cases, that that we didn't have all the the facilities things in place, that we didn't have everything all lined up. But the reality is we have phenomenal teachers and staff at all levels of the system, and they stepped up and said, we're just going to make this happen, we'll make it so. And so you have to take some risks and you have to take some hits, but be really clear in why you're doing what you're doing and not allow people to shake you off of that. So.
I think that in our district, along with some of the naysayers and some of the questioning about whether or not this would make the most sense, a real turning point for us was having the third grade goal, we call it, in our strategic plan, which really has driven the work since that was put in front of us. And we can refer to the third grade goal as the reason that we are doing all these things. And it's explicit. So in Highline, our strategic plan has a goal that says that 19 out of 20 of the kindergartners in the 2013 class, so they're now first graders, will meet or exceed standard in all core subjects by third grade. It's exactly what you're talking about. We have to start with that kindergarten cohort to get them where we need them to be when they start getting tested by the state in third grade. And in my role in Highline, that has been a tremendous thing to be able to sort of fall back on or put forward. We're doing this because of this reason, and that has been huge. So I wonder how many districts have really explicit strategic plans that focus on early learning and the P-3 strategy in general.
Well, and it's not just having the plan, it's how you develop the plan. And my colleague Nancy Keegan, Superintendent Tukwila, went through a similar strategic planning process with our same facilitator. And a big part of the power of our plan is that we engage the community, we engaged every principal, teachers from every school. We took a year, so it really wasn't, and I disabused people of this notion very quickly, it wasn't the superintendent's plan, right? This is our community's strategic plan. This is what we as a collective have committed to doing for our children. And I think the next goal is that we stop referring to the strategic plan because it just becomes our work. And I think that's sort of the next iteration that we'll get to in another couple of years. But having that plan, there's real power in it. And I think the learning for me in the whole strategic planning process and product is you then have this really clear roadmap for where you're going and where you need to put your resources, right? So when people say, well, why are you doing that? Just pull out the strategic plan. Well, we've codified what we want to see happen in Highline, and we have to deliver on that. And the reality is, too, that everyone around this table knows the research that if our kids aren't where they need to be by third grade, that ladder that they have to climb becomes two greased poles with no rungs in between. It becomes that hard for them to move up through our system. So if we can eliminate that gap, and I believe that we can by third grade, we will actually be doing what we all got into this profession to do. And so the other thing that I will add to that is that the real I think power in this too is reminding us, reminding our teachers, reminding everyone else of why we got into this work in the first place. And so we've said that at least 19 out of 20 of our third graders by 2017 will be proficient in all core subjects. We very deliberately did not say 100% because you will never have 100%. There will always be an outlier. You may have 99.9. And if we continue to talk in platitudes in public education, no one will take us seriously. But you say 95%, and people have to take you seriously. That's not a platitude. So that was a very deliberate choice on our part. Not that we're writing off some kids or that we're not committed to getting every kid there, but we know that realistically you're always going to have those outliers. I think I also want to be clear, though, too, that we have to get smarter, I believe, in K-12 in telling our own story rather than having it told for us. So in Highline, as I said earlier, all of our kids don't have access to high-quality pre-K. So the range of kindergarten readiness that our kids have across our elementary schools ranges from, at the low end, last year, 15% of students at one of our elementary schools came in ready to learn. 78% at one of our elementary schools came in ready to learn. But now here's the fascinating story. At the end of last year, 85, 90% of the kids in that 15% cohort were ready for first grade. The principal at that school said to me not long ago, I just got 25 new first graders, though, who didn't go through that grade. What are we going to do? And I said, well, fear not, because we are keeping very, very good cohort data. So at the end of the day in 2017, we as a system, I as a superintendent, am accountable for every child that resides in my system, whether they arrived yesterday or 5 years ago. But the reality is we have to start showing the impact of what we can do with our kids over time and the impact of what happens when kids do move and come into our system late. So we will have cohort data, very good, solid cohort data around the kids that we started with, so that when 2017 hits and 98% of our third graders are proficient in core subjects in that cohort, but our overall public data says 80%, we can tell that story. We can tell that story with data. And I think that is a potential game changer as well for just the work and for how we look at policy, how we look at legislation, how we look at funding, how we look at everything. So.
And it makes a great statement actually for this group here, these people around the table who represent the 7 districts in the roadmap region. And if all of us were moving forward in the same direction with these same kinds of goals and same kinds of systems in place and common kindergarten registration dates and common assessments, because we're all doing walk kids and we're all implementing full day K, as kids move throughout our region, we could really impact their experience if we had an aligned experience from district to district, which I think is the power of what we're doing around this table. I think this would be a great opportunity to open up the table for questions from other people, other districts and other individuals. So Susan, would you be willing to respond to perhaps Wanda first?
I'll start.
Okay.
And I know your commitment to P-3 learning and the social emotional domain as well, right? So maybe if you could share with us your focus on social emotional learning. I've heard some wonderful things. And so I'm interested in hearing more about how is the PBIS work going? How are you guys sort of structuring your classroom so that as children are coming in with distinct needs in that area, that you're responding to them and not seeing them as a negative?
Yeah, it's a really good question. We had this conversation at the coalition meeting the other day with some of our principals. So I would say a number of things. First of all, I think we have to help equip our teachers and paraeducators and principals with the knowledge and the skills to understand that social emotional learning isn't 15 minutes of the day. Social emotional learning and development spans the entire day, everything that you're doing with a child, right, regardless of content. So there's that piece of it. I think some people think it's sort of like, so I do reading, I do math, I do writing, I do social emotional, and we've got to move away from that, right? So that's a shift. Having the conversations with folks around the fact that we're not actually going to, recommend a kindergartner, for example, for special education services within the first week of school, unless that child has come in with an IEP. We're actually going to really diagnose what's going on and do some interventions, right? And if there are behaviors, we are going to use our PBIS strategies, right, to get there. That's a shift, right? That's a shift for some folks, and it's hard. I don't think that Highline is alone in seeing students, even our youngest learners, coming in with some very profound needs and some very extreme behaviors. And the best strategies aren't always going to be able to meet those needs. Wanda, I think we all know that.
Mm-hmm.
And so I think it's continuing to make sure that our teachers have the skills, but also that when there is a safety issue, that we do intervene. And that's tough. That's tough. I was in an elementary school last week where a first grader was in reading with the principal, cutest little guy. And half hour before, he'd been throwing chairs around his classroom. They had to evacuate all the kids because they were worried for the kids' safety. It's a challenge. And that is becoming more the norm. It's rare that I walk into an elementary school where I'm not seeing extreme behaviors like that. I actually think one of the conversation has to be bigger than what we're doing around PBIS and social emotional.
Systemic.
I think it's the fact that K-12 systems are not equipped to meet the increasing needs and challenges that our families have.
So
we
true.
can't do it. I visited 4 schools in 1 week, and in every school there was some violent outburst where kids were being violent, hitting teachers out in the hallway. This is the reality that our schools are dealing with every day, and even with wonderful partnerships with things like Navos and other places, we can't do it. We can't do it alone. So I think we've got to talk about those wraparound services in the community that can help us deal with this, interventions for families in crisis, My first question when I see a child with extreme behavior is, what's the story? What's going on in that child's life, right? And so it's a big challenge for us, and I just don't think that as K-12 systems we're completely equipped. I think we're doing our best. We're learning as we go, but we can't do it all. We can't do it all.
Thank you.
In regard to social emotional assessment, one of the things that we're doing in Highline is implementing the Walk Kids program with TS Gold 3 times a year in our kindergarten class. We are doing all 6 developmental areas in the fall as the state requires. But we are then repeating that assessment in winter and spring and focusing on just 3 areas that we think are our highest leverage areas, but it includes social emotional. So all of our kindergartners will be reassessed in March around social emotional objectives, literacy objectives, and math objectives, and then we'll revisit that again in June. So we will really start to have that data about how our youngest students, anyway, are doing as they move through that first year of school in kindergarten.
And also, before we even assess that, one of the things that I liked about what we did this year was that when our kindergartners arrived with their families, the first conversation that the teacher had with the parents wasn't shoving data about their kid in front of the family. It was asking the family, tell me about your child. Because really, we're also talking about cultural competence.
Right.
We're talking about understanding where our families and kids are coming from. I think there's real power in a teacher sitting down and saying to a family, tell me about Lindsay. What does she like to do? And making that connection and getting to know the child first as a child. And then doing our job and teaching and collecting the data and doing what we need to do, but making that connection with the child and the family first, I think is powerful.
Might I also add too that Jumpstart, I think, provides a real opportunity for our teachers to get to know students in the classroom setting well before school starts, and the hustle bustle of the day has not begun. There's not kind of the chaotic first few days of 500, 600 students in the building, and teachers are reporting to us that they are just elated with the opportunity to have this focused, calm time with their students to really understand their strengths and their challenges. And then they're able to use that information to thoughtfully plan their classes and think about how they want to balance those classes. So we have that opportunity as well to meet social emotional needs.
And those are systems-wide changes. So other things that were supported as a P-3 system in our district, we have Jumpstart available to all of our students in all 18 elementary schools in August. And because we implement Walk Kids in all 18 elementary schools, not just our state-funded ones, we have this family connection time at the beginning of the school year, the first 3 days of kindergarten, for every child to sit down. And I think that has been a really powerful move. It was a hard one to get everyone to agree to, another one of our hits we took, but it has really paid off because system-wide, our families are having the same experience of the family connection at the beginning of the school, Jumpstart, assessments 3 times a year. And it's really made a difference. It's much easier to implement, actually, when you do it in all your schools.
Yeah.
And you have everyone having that experience. You don't have some schools saying, well, we start on the first day of school, why are you starting on the 4th day of school? And all those logistical things go away.
Well, and the beauty of it, as we all know, the way you make this work sustainable and the way you take it from plan to initiative to just your work is you create widespread buy-in and belief among your teachers and staff, right? So part of the power we have now is because of the quality of professional learning and the follow-through on promising to give materials and support. Even some of our teachers who were skeptical early on are now our biggest advocates, which is hugely powerful because then when you want to continue to sort of push, it's not the district pushing, it's teachers advocating, right, with their colleagues saying, no, this is something we need to do. And that's huge, and that is huge. And that's a testament to the work that Anne and Lindsay have done because teachers have seen the follow-through on what was promised to them and they feel respected and engaged as partners in the work, and that's been transformative. So, other questions?
I think you've actually led right into the question that I have, which is if you could talk a little bit more about the specific supports and resources that you've put in place for kindergarten teachers to ensure quality use of that full day.
Yeah. So early on, I had, in my career back in Pennsylvania, had the great fortune of meeting Kathy Feldman, who works with an organization, founded an organization called Reach Associates. And I think she's hands down one of the best professional learning leaders, educators I've ever met. And what I love about Kathy is that she knows the research, she knows the practices, she knows the strategies, but she actually can do them. So she walks into a classroom and will take your kids and teach the lesson. And so all of a sudden, all those excuses of when you see the video, or a lot of times, someone will say, "Well, take the 5 kids who act out the most out, and I'll take the rest of the kids." No, she walks in and takes every single kid in that class and does a lesson, and has those kids eating out of her hand because she's so masterful at what she does. So now the excuses are gone because here it's happening with our kids, right? And she's walking her talk, right? And it's not always pretty. She has her days too, right? But she shows what can be done. So all of a sudden, that student that you thought he's never going to pay attention, or she just can't sit still, they're doing it. And the teacher's realizing with a couple key moves, they can make some changes in their room. So I think providing models and professional learning that was with our own kids in our own classrooms was powerful. Providing teachers with not a script, heaven knows we don't want to go back to the days of open court, but with a very clear plan for how you organize a full day K-day, which felt a little, I think, prescriptive at first, and still does to some teachers. But the reality is, it's like all of us. I can't leave my day to chance, right? I mean, I actually factor in like when I'm going to do laundry, or go to the gym. Like if I don't do that, it doesn't happen. So just as when you're teaching, if you don't factor in when you're going to do everything, it's not going to happen. So helping teachers understand that this is how you can make it all work, because a lot of them were like, how am I going to get this all done? Because they hadn't been doing it before. So giving them good experiences, good support, giving them an image of what's possible, giving them the structures to show how they can do it, and then listening, right? A lot of listening, and adjusting and responding, I think has been, and I'll let Lindsay and Ann weigh in on that, but that's what I would start with.
I think that was huge, and one of the things we had to overcome was the fact that, as Susan alluded to earlier, we had full-day kindergarten in our district already. So we used the opportunity of converting to a district-wide full-day free program to say, and now we're going to change how this looks a little bit. So for those people who had already been teaching full-day K, that was a little bit of a stretch. They felt as though we were saying what they were doing was not necessarily what we wanted them to be doing. So that was our hardest sell group there. But Kathy Feldman is really powerful, and we realized that we needed that alignment in our professional development in the same way that we needed alignment everywhere else. So she has come in and worked with our teachers. We have Lindsay developed an incredible video library that actually shows Kathy doing all of these lessons connected directly to a component. So if it's Writer's Workshop, we've got a video of her doing that so teachers can go back and look at it. We also have videos of teachers in the district implementing the components. So first we gave them the schedule for the day with all the critical components, but then we had the PD aligned directly to that and created the video library to support them when Kathy's gone. And now we're in the second year of that process, so we're developing teacher leaders who will help to sustain that work, and we hired 2 K-1 specialists who are out in each having 9 schools working with the kindergarten teams to implement this work with fidelity. And it's always a challenge, but we are really seeing huge shifts.
And I just want to say too, one of the leadership lessons in this, and you just alluded to it, is when you come into a system and initiate any kind of significant change, some will see it as an indictment of what came before. And it's a very, very hard message to convey, that we're not saying that people weren't doing good work before, that people weren't working hard before, that people didn't care before. We have amazing folks in Highline who have been teaching kindergarten for years, but we weren't investing in them. They were doing what they knew. They were doing what they knew. Our job was to come in and show them that there was so much more to know. Right? So not indicting what was or wasn't happening before, but saying, let's look bigger. And I think that's a constant tension that we balance as leaders when we're initiating any kind of change like this. And you have to be very careful, because you don't want to demoralize people in the process. And you can't fault someone for not reaching a bar that they were never really exposed to, so I didn't even know what the bar was, much less have the skills, the supports to reach the bar, right? We have to put that in place, and that wasn't there for them, so.
The only thing that I would add is that we have committed on our team and also in our partnerships with other teams in the teaching and learning realm to be extremely responsive to teachers. So if we receive an email, we are responding the same day. If we receive an email from a principal, we are responding the same day. And it is on our team, whatever it takes to get that principal or that teacher what they need to implement the components of the kindergarten day. And it's laughable at times because we are sometimes running around doing silly circus acts to try and make sure that happens. But our teachers, they know that now. They know that they can email me if they have a question about science. And I may not have the answer, but I will route them to the person and get them the support they need that day. So I think that we have really helped teachers to understand that as the level of expectation goes up and the accountability goes up, the level of support goes up as well. Kindergarten teachers, I was one for 7 years. We did not have that. We were kind of the forgotten grade for so long. So that's a big shift for our teachers, and I think that they really feel that and acknowledge.
But like with everything, there's there's sort of a plus and a minus to everything. So I think teachers love the support, the investment, the attention, but with that comes accountability, right? So we've now put a real spotlight on this. So on the one hand, it's like, well, I was ignored before, I wasn't invested before, that wasn't good. Oh, but now people are watching what I'm writing. And I share that because we have to manage that as well, because we are not going to get great outcomes for kids unless we're investing in the adults, right, to do that. So I don't think we're ever going to create great things for kids at the expense of the adults in the system. I think we've seen examples around the country where when you go in and attempt a slash and burn approach to how you staff your K-12 system, it doesn't really pay off over time. You might get some immediate wins, you might get some great media press, but you're not going to permanently improve your system. And so we really sort of take this investment in our teachers, our staff very, very seriously. And what Lindsay points out, and I would say our early learning team is the model for being responsive to teachers and principals. I wish I could sit here and tell you that every single one of my departments at Highline is as responsive. They are not. And I know for a fact because I hear about it when they're not. I don't hear about it from kindergarten teachers, first grade. I mean, I really, really don't. So it's the power of their commitment to understanding that we are going to take all the excuses away by making sure that our educators have what they need. And we celebrate them too, every chance that we get. So,
Which is a great way to come full circle, because our perspective in the early learning department at Highline is the reason we can do that is because we have tremendous support at our highest leadership level. And I have been in both places, and I know how that works both ways. So I can tell you that the gains we have made, while a bit unusual in a lot of people's eyes, have happened because we have had a leader who has said, okay, what will it take? Yes. And actually, when I first got here, I was probably here for 3 months, and I thought, I have got to get Jumpstart on our agenda for August. So I came in March, this was May, and if I wait until the budget is resolved, because it just never seems to get resolved, I was not going to get able to do this.
That
so
Dugan.
I went in and talked to Susan and said I told her what Jumpstart looked like and how we could implement it and what would happen. And I said, but we have to make a decision now. If we don't make it now, we will have teachers up in arms in August when we try to tell them that this program has to happen. We need to train them in June. We need to promote it. We need to get everybody excited. We need the word out to families, yada, yada, yada. And Susan said, well, what will it cost? And I said, well, I think we can do it for $81,000 and we have a $10,000 grant. She said, okay, that's 71. And I said, I can do math. And she said, well, how about 70? I said, oh, okay, we can do it for 70, no problem. And I walked out thinking, oh my gosh, we now have to have a district-wide program running in August. And it was the end of May. And nobody even knew what Jumpstart was in this district. I mean, we had no model, we had nothing to do. And actually that's right about the time we hired Lindsay. Because we knew it just couldn't happen. So I said to one of my colleagues, well, the thing I've learned in Highline is I just better really think through what I asked Susan Enfield for, because I probably will get it. If it has, data behind it, it's a good program, she will fund it somehow, some way, and then we have to implement. So I think it has to be all of those pieces in place, and frankly, I believe it starts with the superintendent.
well, and getting the right people on the bus, right? So I started my career, I think I told you, as a high school teacher, and I taught journalism, so I did the student newspaper, and I interned as a student teacher under a wonderful master teacher who had run this program, and it was one of the top high school papers in the country. And unlike a lot of places, he did not proof the paper before it went public. I mean, you know, and his model was train them and trust them, right? You invest in the learning of your people, whether they're high school kids or adults, and then you support and you let them go and do it. And that train them and trust them, I mean, I didn't need to train Ann, but the point is, get them in, get the right people in, and then let them do their job, right? Make sure they have what they need to do the job, but don't get in their way. So I just tried not to get in Lindsay's and Ann's way, and that seems to be working. So my strategy actually is to do nothing. And let them do everything, because they are and I know that everyone around this table is incredibly good at what they do, but I really do believe they are some of the finest educators and leaders out there doing this work. And it's incredibly hard, and as Ann said, you know, we've taken some hits along the way. It hasn't always been pretty. We'll take some more before this is all said and done, but I think at the end of the day, we know we're in it together. And Ann knows that when she needs me, she lets me know, and I do my best to be there. I can't always be there. I think Lindsay knows that too. Lindsay knows she can email me. Teachers email me. I mean, so I think that part of it is creating a sense that we're all in it together. No one's more important than anyone else, and no one's going to get it done. No one is going to get it done without the other people who are there. And so it's really a team effort. So